nothing to discuss, oh. Cause I take when by default and without any doubt, oh. I'm a me happy adult, oh. I no go feed the girl, I no go feed the girl is out, oh. I'm a mind that's with the talk, oh. I put my life into my job and I know I'm in trouble. She manipulate my love, oh. I know holy and I know that get both. Like the Baba Frayo, my ayo, don't cry, yo. I need to go and shadow. 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 Shadow. I need to go and shadow. I need to go and shadow. I need to go and shadow. I dey Port when them kill Soboma. I dey try to buy moto, one Toyota Corolla. My feelings been they swing like Django Lover. Feelings been they swing like Django Lover. Now you crash your Ferrari for Lucky Bona. Now some more to remake could have been all over. My feelings today swing like Django Lover. Feelings today swing like Timbani at you. I'm a white dog in Fenisu. Why you say I did nothing for you when if I do anything you want me to do? Timbani at you. I'm a white dog in Fenisu. Why you say I did nothing for you when if I do anything you want me to do? Maybe another time, maybe another life. You will be my wife and we'll get it right. Young cast, last. Now everybody go job breakfast.
So many reasons why I want it for you, my love. Now you want to retire with my love. See all the little good things you do, they make me no. This distance is taking a hold of me for sure. Baby, come closer. I want to make me there. Girl, I want to make you. Oh, no. I feel like make you. Pull over. Should be not these kind of things where they make man see ya. And me I understand, say your dad know like me. See me, I won't make it no, say me there for you, cara. And if not the price be that, I feel like to see ya. I never traded you for nothing. This love will make me the jackpot shit. Without you, I'm not free to love. Without you, I'm not gonna tell me with this all bingo. I never traded you, baby. This love will make me the starting. No. I'm not gonna tell me what's up, bingo. I'm gonna want to make me ready. I'm not gonna want to make you. Baby, I feel like making you. Oh, baby, oh, no.
Record.
You're now listening to an official Oh So City mix.
Oh So City, que rico, papi.
Baby, calm down. Yo, this your body, it puts in my heart for lockdown, oh lockdown. Yo, you sweet life, phantom. If I tell you, say I love you, you know they for me, young girl. No, tell me, no, oh. Baby, gon' give me your lo. You got me like, whoa. Shawty gon' give me your lo. I see this fine girl from my party, she wear yellow. Every other girl they do too much, but this girl mellow. Now in my divine situation, I go use they tell I'm mellow. Finally I find way to talk to the girl, but she ain't no one follow. Who you gonna phone for one? When you know I come for one, then I start to feel a bum one. But she dey give me small one. I know, say she's a bit pass it down one. But she feeling insecure, cause her friends go they go my light ring go on. Go they go my light ring go on.
Yeah, I know we look shy, but for you I get down low. And my hips make you cry when I'm moving around you. Do it once, do it twice. I push can calm down, calm down. Dance with me and take the lead now, lead now. Got you so high that you can't calm down, calm down. Don't you ask, you know you're allowed, allowed. When it's you, I can't say no. Baby, give me low. He got me like Shawty gon' give me a As I reach my house, I see me got a small wall. As me I wake up, now she did my mind don't walk. Then one day two, one of you folk go was. Now so me I go down, see me willing go walk. Got my hand on your heart now, I can feel it.
Greetings, Aquaba. Hello, welcome. Happy Sunday. We hope you are doing very well this Sunday. Hope you're reaching your highest level of mental, physical, and spiritual strength, and that you are on the rise. We are so honored and grateful that you have decided to spend your Sunday joining this week's episode of Our Ancestors' Voices, a weekly program sponsored by the All African People's Revolutionary Party. And our topic today is remembering Mae Aquash. December 1975, Mae Pictoh Aquash, a dedicated activist and leader for the American Indian movement for Indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere. In December of 1976, she disappeared on the Pine Ridge Reservation, and it wasn't until February of 1976 that her much decomposed physical remains were found in a desolate area of the reservation. So today, we want to honor her as an Indigenous woman, as a woman, and as an activist committed to Indigenous rights. And so we wanted to do this program in December 2023 to honor our sister, Mae Pictoh Aquash. So we're glad that you joined us. We give honor to the Indigenous people, as we will humbly do our best to do today. And we always give honor to our African ancestors, who are the only reason that we are here today. And we live every day thankful for the opportunity to do honor to them by continuing our struggle for justice and forward progress. And so we start with just our regular introductions. Our Ancestors' Voices is sponsored by the All African People's Revolutionary Party, the AAPRP. And the AAPRP is a revolutionary, independent, mass, pan-African political party that is based in Africa. And our objective, what we are fighting for, what we are working for every single day, is Pan-Africanism, which we define correctly as one unified socialist Africa. We believe that this objective, when achieved, will bring about all of the necessary elements that African people lack today, scattered and suffering in 120 countries worldwide, to bring us the power we need to resolve all of our problems. That's what we see Pan-Africanism as being able to do for us, and that's why we dedicate our lives to bringing it into existence. And our work to achieve Pan-Africanism is a part of a strategy that was outlined in Kwame Nkrumah's Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare to unite all of the revolutionary Pan-African formations on the ground in Africa who agree with the definition of one unified socialist Africa. And that is the work that we do every single day, every hour, every second, every minute, every hour, every day, every week, every month, and every year of our lives. Our Ancestors' Voices is hosted each week by myself, Ajamu, and Shakura Umi, my biological and ideological daughter. And we are both active organizers within the AAPRP. And to get us started with today's topic, remembering Anna Mae Aquash, I will turn it over to Shakura.
Thank you. Appreciate you, kind sir. Appreciate you. So, yes. So, those of you who are in a position to repeat after me, please recite these words. This is the indigenous people's lands. This is the indigenous people's land. We need to continue to say that over and over because it will always be true, regardless of how many people are ignorant or deny it. Nevertheless, how much propaganda is created and disseminated to rewrite time and space of the history, the herstory, and the theirstory. And no matter how long capitalism, the system that dehumanizes people for a living, controls the lands of indigenous peoples, we should still recite that this is the indigenous people's land. From the very top of the Canadian grounds down to the bottom of Chile, we need to acknowledge that and say that as much as we can. We also need to remember that increasing our political education would help greatly with understanding just how much the indigenous people have done in terms of how widespread their land actually is. And if we have a better understanding of that, then we're in a better position to support them and to ally with them and to help fight for them to get their ground and their land back. So we need to repeat that as much as possible because it's always going to be a true statement. As I said previously, it doesn't matter how much propaganda has taught you that this is not the indigenous people's land. It doesn't matter how much propaganda has taught you to forget about the indigenous people. It doesn't matter how much propaganda has taught you that if you were born here, this is your land. None of that is based on truth and is based on principle. None of that is based on that. What's based on truth and principle is understanding that this land is the indigenous people's land. As I said, from the very top of Canada to the very bottom of Chile. And so if we think about that in more context, then that means if we are willing to accept that this is a true statement, hopefully because we have a higher level of political education, and more than that, because we belong to an organization that is fighting to make a difference in the world, and we are working with other organizers who also are fighting to make the conditions in the world better, because those organizations are working to improve the masses of people everywhere, then if that is the case, then we know that to be true already. We already know that to be true, that this is the indigenous people's lands from Canada down to Chile. And if we accept the truth because we already know that it is true, then that means our ability will be stronger when we stand with indigenous people and help correct other people who don't understand that the truth is that this is the indigenous people's land. Because it's not enough for you yourself to just know it. What you have to do if you're truly an organizer who believes in helping the masses of human beings, if you're truly an organizer who believes that you have a responsibility to make this world a better place, then that means that you have to even work harder, not just to accept the truth, but to also broadcast and to promote the truth. That means you have a responsibility. That means you have a responsibility and a legacy where you have to set examples and let other people see how you are navigating your access to your political education and your access to your organization that's working to help the conditions of people everywhere. So that means that when you hear people say, I'm an American, I was born here, this is my land, and you know they're not indigenous, that means you get to correct them. That means you get to give them a proper analysis. That means you get to share some of your political education, which is based on truth and humanity, and that affects and dismantles their lack of political education that is not based on truth and humanity. And so this also means if we accept the truth and we are working to correct behaviors that are not helping the indigenous people get their land back, that means that we can use our knowledge, we can use our intellect, we can use our organizational knowledge and our ability with our political education to set the record straight and to give accurate knowledge, to literally release accurate knowledge based on truth and justice. That is our responsibility. It is not just enough to know that this is the indigenous people's land. It's not just enough to know that the holiday in November is a horrible holiday that celebrates the mass murder, the mass rape of indigenous people. You can't just know that information, you have to act on it. You have to share it with other people. You have to remind other people why they should not be celebrating a day where the day is dedicated to killing and raping people. I mean, this is really basic information that we're talking about here. And so it's no different outside of November. We still need to acknowledge that this is their land. We still need to acknowledge that. Just like we need to acknowledge that occupied Palestine is Palestinian land. Just like we need to acknowledge that the entire African continent belongs to the African people, regardless of where they were born. I love how Kwame Nkrumah says the African nation belongs to any African person. And so, and vice versa. African people belong to the African nation. I think that's actually the quote instead. I got it mixed up. But my point is, this is where that accurate knowledge comes into play, because if you are in an organization working for justice, if you are increasing your political education, then you have a bigger responsibility where not only can you use that organization and the information you obtain from it, but because you're in the organization, your political education is naturally going to increase. Because from an assumptive standpoint, you all are going to have some type of foundation where you're exchanging information so that you can have more of an opportunity to make a difference for people everywhere. So because of that, that means you're getting an opportunity to spread more accurate knowledge, and you should take that action very seriously. As I said, it's not enough for you to just sit with it and know it. You have to act on it, because the world is not going to change if none of us decide that we need to change the way our systems are operating. And if none of us decide that we need to change the way people are thinking about things and the ideologies behind things. We gave a seminar on changing the language. So instead of calling it home, understanding that this can't be your home if you're not indigenous. So not using the word home. I specifically say to my friends, yes, I'm going back to my apartment. Or if they ask me, they text me when I'm here at my apartment, are you home? I say, I'm at my apartment. I don't engage with them in that way. I don't engage with saying the holiday name in November. I've always said unthanksgiving. And before that, I said Thanksgiving. Either way, it takes away the power of colonization. And that's really what we're trying to do. We're trying to change the behavior of colonization and the social acceptance of it. That's what we are trying to do. And so we're trying to dismantle that. And the best way to do that is to promote accurate information and knowledge, which means calling it on Thanksgiving. That means making sure that people understand that this is indigenous people's land. No matter how tired they get of you saying it, you're going to continue to say it. You're going to shout it from the rooftops and let everybody else know. Because as I just pointed out, we are in a responsible hold where we have a responsibility. If we are not indigenous, we have a responsibility to help indigenous people get their land back, because they have more so than done their part to help Africans get our land back. And we are all working together to help Palestinians get their land back. We're working to help Irish people get their land back. We're working to help Asian descent people get their land back. Again, a victory or a success for any of us means that the work the rest of us are trying to do to all get our land back will make it much easier and will make it less harder. Because the problem is all of us are colonized right now, but all of us are not going to be powerless without land for long. We are breaking these systems down, and we are working hard to do that, but the allyship is going to continue to be key. And so, as I said, a success for indigenous people means it'll be more successful and more feasible for Palestinians, and it'll be more feasible and more successful for Africans, and more feasible and successful for Irish people, and so on and so forth. And so this is where we start to understand that, again, it's not enough for you to just know that this is the indigenous people's land. You have a responsibility, especially if you know that, to act on that knowledge and to share it and to correct behaviors when you meet other people who do not know that the truth is that this is the indigenous people's land. That's where you get to share that information. You get to explain to them, as we just did, that the indigenous people's land does not just consist of the US. It actually starts at the top of Canada and goes all the way down to the bottom of Chile. You get to explain that, because if you truly are down for the people, and if you're in an organization working for justice that has a political education component, then you understand that your responsibility is to help eradicate some of the propaganda that exists in the world that is affecting indigenous people from getting their land back. That's where that comes from, is us each correcting the ignorance and addressing it and separating it and eradicating it so that it cannot reproduce, so that ignorant parents cannot reproduce and literally have children that they are still passing ignorance to. That's where that comes from. That is where that comes from. So us understanding that more helps us to decenter colonization and colonial rule, and it helps us to help new behaviors develop, because we're doing that. We are committed to the principles by thinking about that. And that means you're committed to them in all aspects of your life. That means when you go to graduation ceremonies, if they're presenting a color of guards or whatnot, if you understand that standing for those type of rituals means that you are celebrating colonization and celebrating inhumanity, then that means you have to commit to those principles even when everyone else is questioning why you're doing what you're doing. When I think about the fact that I always say the word thanksgiving, I'm very proud, or unthanksgiving, I'm very proud of that. And I don't wish that I would change that for anyone. To me, that's me giving honor to indigenous people and reminding myself that that day was not a day where they were seen as human. That day was not a day where they were seen as valued individuals. That day is a day where Europeans benefited off of killing and exploiting other human beings, which is one of the saddest days that we can think about. And we know that Africans have had plenty of days like that. And so when we think about our principles, we're not just thinking about from a temporary standpoint, we're thinking about it from a legendary standpoint, because we're trying to make sense of the world. And the best way to do that is to know what you're fighting for. That's the best way to do that. And so I had several friends this year who have graduated. There were ceremonies in May, ceremonies in August. I have a friend who graduated today. And each and every time, part of the ceremony is to present the color guards, or present the colors of the flags, whatever it's called. And I explained to my friend in May, I said, I'm just letting you know I'm not standing when that time comes in the ceremony. And my friend was like, no, I understand. I'm not standing either. And we both sat there while everybody else stood. And that was that. And then that friend that sat with me ended up graduating in August. And so when I told his family members, listen, when I was here with him in May, we both sat, and I'm going to continue to sit because I'm not standing for something that I don't support. I don't agree with it. And these are the reasons why. And to my surprise, the people were like, oh, yeah, no, I'm not going to stand either. That's a good idea. And I'm thinking to myself, this is why we have to think for ourselves, though, because you shouldn't just be telling me it's a good idea. You should have your own principles where you too believe that celebrating a system that does not value you as a human being is not something you should do. So when the time came, they disappointed me and they didn't stand. They didn't sit with me. They stood up. And so this is why committing to principles is so important, you all. Understanding why you do what you do. That is so important. And I didn't say anything when we left, but the person was like, I just wanted to let you know, I just stood because so-and-so stood, and I didn't think that he was going to stand. And I'm thinking to myself, it shouldn't matter though. If you know that this system doesn't deserve your time, or in this case, your leg support, then why would you give it to them? If they're not valuing you, why would you do that? So again, we still have to understand what it means to be principled, and we still have to understand how those of us who are in organizations that are working for justice, we can't just have the information that we have. We can't just have the political education that we have. That's not enough. We have to use it. We have to act on it. We have to demonstrate it. We have to display it for other people to literally see. We have to model for them what that looks like so that they can understand why they too should join an organization that is working for justice. And if they never choose to take that step, at least they can understand that they have some growing to do. And maybe at another point, they'll consider joining. But this is where that comes from, because most of these principles that those of us who organize have, it's because we're learning them while we're organizing, you all. None of us were born with these skills and these concepts. We had to learn them as we grew. We had to make mistakes planning events. We had to make mistakes planning virtual events. We had to make mistakes not, counting something ahead of time and figuring out next time we need to make sure that we have enough translators and we have enough breakout rooms in the Zoom. These are all learning things that we go through as you continue to do the work. But you have to join an organization that's working for justice first so that you can be okay with making mistakes. And I was just talking to my dad about this the other day. Like, I'm just really starting to think more deeply about everything that I thought was based on something else. And I'm now realizing a lot of the ideologies that I have about professionalism, about, navigating spaces, making mistakes when people are depending on you, a lot of that is based on colonial white supremacy. I'm really like unpacking that and really, really starting to dig deeper into it, because I'm thinking to myself, well, who defines professionalism? Who tells you that wearing a business suit is better than wearing jeans? Who has taught us that? It was based on some Europeans and their thought process of what looked appropriate, right? And it's the same thing with thinking about why you shouldn't make mistakes. As adults, we're so afraid to get messy. We're so afraid to not be perfect. And I think that's too based on white supremacy, because we already feel like we're not enough in a system that does not value us. So when we make mistakes, that just makes us feel more, and it kind of exacerbates the feeling that we're already just trying to show up and just be enough, but we're still not enough. And so we're trying to figure out how to navigate that, because now we've made a mistake. So now not only are we not enough, but we're also incompetent. And we already were uneducated, and we already were stupid, and all these other things. And so these are some complex things that we're really unpacking here, you all. But I can tell you, if you join an organization that's working for justice, you'll find some tools to combat that. You will strongly find some tools to combat that. And it won't be as difficult and hard for you to navigate it, because you have other people in this organization that you can talk to about it. They can share their experiences with you. You can share your experiences with them. You can grow, as I said, and learn, because of the organizing that you're doing. Next slide, please. We can also think about how from Mae Pictoh Aquash to Sekou Touré, to Assata Shakur, to Theodore Gomes, Carlotta, Kwame Ture, Mariela Castro, and Moana Koyate. These are all oppressed people who have always had the benefit of the benefit of the most wonderful people on earth, who have made the conscious decision to sacrifice everything in their personal lives to make a contribution for forward human progress. I will say the last part again. Every single one of these people that we named, and so many that we did not name, they all have had the benefit of the most wonderful people on earth, because they have all decided to make the conscious decision to sacrifice everything in their personal lives so that they could make a contribution for forward human progress. All of these people have lost something because of the choices that they have made. Some of these people have received death threats, and some of these people have lost family members because of the choices that they have made. But every single one of these people also understood, I am going to make this choice because I need the conditions of this world to be different for my people. Every single one of these people has made that conscious decision. And this is why we should respect them. This is why we should honor them. This is why we should celebrate them. This is why we should learn their names and learn what they have done. And this is why we should mention them. And this is why we should remember them. Their legacy is so important for us to continue on. Without them, we would not be anything close to existing, because many of our lineages are tied in with theirs in some way, shape, or form. But also ideologically, we would not be close to existing, because their actions are the reason that we exist. If just one of them had chosen not to fight back, that would have made our unit less strong. If just one of them had chose not to stand up for their principles, that would have made our unit less strong. If just one of them had chose to sell out our people, that would have made us more vulnerable, more weak, and we wouldn't have had all of the same tools in our tool belt that we currently have. We wouldn't have had the progress that we've had either. I think about our comrade Moana Koyate and the work that they did as the only femme person on the Million Man March board. And we, as an All African People Revolutionary Party, we encouraged that because we wanted to make sure that there was a Pan-Africanist lens, but also an anti-patriarchal lens and approach as well. And so Moana did a great job of kind of pushing that line a little bit, because it wasn't enough for us to just have this event where we had all these Africans at one time together. We needed to help them understand that there is an international organization working to fight to make sure that their realities are seen from a humanistic perspective. But that does not mean that we should change the conditions in the US. That means it starts at home on the continent in Africa, which is why Pan-Africanism, which means one unified socialist Africa, is what we were pushing as a board member planning for this Million Man March. And so we can think about all of these folks, Anna Mae, all of these folks who contributed and lost everything because they were in a position where other federal agents and other federal organizations were watching them and more closely were targeting them. And I know my dad will talk about that in some future slides to come. So as I prepare to close, I just want to remind us, these folks made a continuous contributing effort, you all. They all made a decision that they wanted to forward human progress. They also all made a decision that the current progress was not a decent one. Every single one of them wanted to change the realities for people because they knew that people deserved to live in a better world. And I would also go on a limb and say every single person that we mentioned, Anna Mae, Sekou Touré, Assata Shakur, Theodore Gomes, Carlotta, Kwame Touré, Mariela Castro, and Moana Koyate, every single one of them was in an organization working for justice. And I would bet even more that every single one of those organizations that they were in had some form of political education connected to it. It's so important, you all. And as we prepare to end out this year, we hope that you all stay safe, but we strongly, strongly challenge and encourage you to join an organization working for justice, maybe even before the new year, if you believe in making resolutions, but at least in 2024, make a change. The worst that can happen is you don't like the organization and you can part ways and try again. But we really need you to start to organize yourselves, because this world does not value us, and it will continue not to value us, regardless of who's in office, regardless of who is in control. We're going to continue to be shot down. African femme people are going to continue to risk their own lives while they give birth to their children. Their children are going to continue to be shot down. Their children are not going to be respected when they go to school. We're not going to be respected when we go to work. We're going to continue to be seen as incompetent, going to continue to be seen like we don't matter and that we're unvaluable, when in actuality, it's the other way around. But they can't afford to let us know how powerful we are. And they certainly can't afford to let us know how powerful the continent is, because that is connected to our destiny. Whatever's happening to Africa is happening to African people. And I would argue whatever's happening to Indigenous people's lands, the same is happening to Indigenous people. If Indigenous people's lands are being disrespected, Indigenous people are going to be disrespected. And the same for Africans. So with that, we strongly recommend you join an organization working for justice, and we thank you. Ashe.
Ashe, thank you, Shakura, very much for laying that very critical foundation. And I just want to talk about briefly, why are we as African revolutionaries, as Pan-Africanists, why are we talking about an Indigenous person of the Western Hemisphere? Why are we saying that we want to remember our sister, Mae Pictoh Aquash? And the answer to that question, you all, is that we recognize, number one, that the struggle that we are engaging in to bring about liberation and forward progress for African people is not a struggle being carried out in isolation. And this is something that needs to be said across the mountaintops, because I know a lot of people, and I'm speaking particularly of my own people, African people, we are very confused about this. We have somehow, because of the oppression we've experienced, allowed ourselves to be convinced that we have to somehow find a way to struggle for our liberation in some sort of vacuum, independent of everything else that's happening in the world. And clearly that strategic so-called strategic approach has not worked for us. It has not allowed us to build capacity. It has not moved us 1 inch closer to the forward progress that we are seeking. So instead, as revolutionaries, we take a different approach. We don't take a myopic approach, meaning small-minded. We don't take a xenophobic approach, meaning afraid of everything we don't understand. Instead, we attempt to take a scientific approach, meaning we base everything on the laws of nature, the laws of the universe. And one of those very important laws is the understanding of dialectical and historical materialism. And essentially what that means is everything in the world holds weight and occupies space. That's the definition of material. Anything that holds weight and occupies space. And so when we're talking about materialism, we're talking about what is the manifestation of everything that holds weight and occupies space. How does it progress? How does it develop? How does it evolve? How does it devolve? What happens? What are the forces that make those things happen? And what historical and dialectical materialism do for us is they help us understand that everything, the way the process that facilitates all of this is the process of opposites. So if you have love, you have to have hate. If you have good, you have to have bad. If you have right, you have to have wrong. If there's no such thing as wrong, then there's no way for you to gauge whether you're ever right. The only way you can gauge whether you're right is you compare it to what's wrong. And that's how you come up with the synthesis that there's right. The only way you can say that you love something is because you can compare to what it means to hate something. And that's how you understand what love is. So this is why it's completely undialectical and inhumane when people say things like, well, I don't hate anything. Hate is as much a part of life as love is. It's dialectical. It's just a question of which one will dominate. So when people say that to me, I tell them, well, so you don't hate when you see a baby starving? You don't hate that? You don't hate seeing somebody the victim of domestic violence? You don't hate that? You don't hate seeing the world destroyed before our very eyes? Well, I do hate those things. Okay, well then you have the capacity to hate. Because if you didn't have the capacity to hate, you wouldn't have the capacity to love. So the reason why we talk about this indigenous woman, Mae Pictoh Aquash, is because we understand that we do not exist in a vacuum, and that the struggle that the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere are waging is a just struggle. And we want to be on the right side of justice, but also we recognize that every blow that they strike is a blow that we benefit from. Just like every blow that we strike against the enemy is a blow that they benefit from. And the only people that don't understand that are people that are not involved in day-to-day struggle to achieve forward progress. They just have an individual perspective. And there are a lot of them out here. A lot of them are YouTube famous or whatever the hell they are. And those are the people that you really have to be careful of, because they're talking to you from their individualist perspective. They have no organization. They're not trying to have any type of organization, because their objective is not tied to really liberating the masses of people, because the only way that could ever happen is through the masses of people being involved in a process to achieve that liberation. No 1, 2, or 10 people can bring about liberation for anybody. If that was the case, that would have happened already. We've had plenty of individually dedicated people who did more work for this struggle than you, I, and 300,000 or 400,000 other people ever will do combined, and yet they were not able to do it. They were much smarter than I'll ever be. They were not able to do it. And so clearly that tells me that individuals can't solve this problem. It can only be solved with the masses of people. So we understand as revolutionary Pan-Africanists that our struggle to achieve Pan-Africanism, whether we like it or not, whether we know it or not, is completely irrelevant. It's 100% linked to the indigenous people's struggle of the Western Hemisphere to achieve their self-determination. It's 100% linked to the Palestinian people's struggle to achieve their self-determination, because the people subjugating the Palestinians, the people subjugating the indigenous people, the people subjugating African people are all one and the same. And the people subjugating poor white people is still the same people. That's a whole different workshop topic, because, up to this point in history, the overwhelming majority of European people, white people, have demonstrated that they are committed to destroying any opportunity they have to link up with our righteous struggles and do what's right for the world, the planet, and the masses of people on earth. But we believe that justice will prevail. So one day they'll figure that out. But we want to talk about Miss Mae Pictoh Aquash from the standpoint of who she was and what she did. So this young woman was a part of the Mi'kmaq people who are from Nova Scotia, which is an area what is known as Canada today, here in the Western Hemisphere. And she came from that area, Nova Scotia. You can find the history of Mi'kmaq people. And that was her ethnic identification. And she came to the US in the late 60s, and she settled in the Boston, Massachusetts area here in the United States. And she was an extremely dedicated young woman and very courageous, and had a ton of heart and a willingness to want to do good for all of humanity. So she worked at one of the many results that came out of the civil rights movements and the movements for justice in the 60s, is there were all these programs that were operating, these social welfare programs. This was the capitalist system's way of compromising. They didn't want revolution, so they began to give people these reforms as a way of appeasing people, so people would think that, the progress was being made that way, and they wouldn't want to pursue something more militant and more radical. This is still the tactic that the capitalist system uses in 2023 and beyond. But one of those programs Mae worked for in the Boston area. And the program she worked for was a community development program in the Roxbury district of Boston. And if you know anything about the history of Boston, Massachusetts, the Roxbury district was where African people lived. It was an African community in Boston. It was the only area in Boston where we were allowed to live. So consequently, as people migrated to that city, that was the area that we would be pushed into and where we lived. And here we had this Indigenous woman who did work with African youth, working on developing their skills and their self-esteem. But she wanted to do work with her own people, which of course she should want to do work with her own people, because we have enough African people who should be working with our people. And it certainly wasn't her responsibility to do that, although we applaud, appreciate, honor, and respect her sacrifice with our youth. That's our responsibility to work with our youth. So, and we encourage Indigenous people like her that want to work with their people to do so, because we know that all of our communities have to be organized. So she wanted to do that, and she was heavily inspired by the work evolving out of Minneapolis at that time in 1968 with the founding of the American Indian Movement, or AIM, by Clyde Belcourt and Dennis Banks. But one of the things that happened during that time for Miss Mae is that she was offered a full ride scholarship to Brandeis University, which is in that region. And, Brandeis is considered an Ivy League university. And what Miss Mae did is she decided that she was going to forego the scholarship and instead move into the interior of the U.S. and work with the American Indian Movement that was doing a lot of work at that time around Indigenous rights. So that's what she decided to do in the early 70s, is dedicate her life to the struggle of Indigenous people for self-determination. And, again, inspired by AIM, she wanted to work on the reservations, which is where, large numbers of Indigenous people reside still, obviously, to this day. And she became involved in a lot of AIM's direct action work that was happening at that time. If you know the history, in 1972, the American Indian Movement went into the Bureau of Indian Affairs office in Washington, D.C., and they took over control of those offices for several days. And Miss Mae was involved in that protest. The All African People's Revolutionary Party, in the person of Kwame Ture and Bob Brown and others, were also there and involved in that process in 1972. And that led to AIM engaging in other actions like the taking over of the town of Wounded Knee, South Dakota in 1973. If you know the history, in 1890, indigenous people were slaughtered by the U.S. military. I mean, y'all, you tell us we need to honor the U.S. military. And, we can't get mad at you because we know you don't know what we know because you haven't done the work we've done to learn what we know. So you do have to understand how absolutely ridiculous it is to us for anybody to be talking to us about how we need to honor the U.S. military. If our relatives join the U.S. military, that's because they're misinformed and confused. It's not because the U.S. military is a positive institution. I mean, that's insane. So in 1890, the U.S. military engaged in slaughter against the indigenous people in the town of Wounded Knee. Hundreds of indigenous people were murdered there. And it's to this day is the largest single execution of people that's taken place on what's known as U.S. soil. They sit there when the person shot up the Las Vegas concert a couple of years ago, the country concert in Las Vegas, where that in European Jason Aldean, who sings that song, "Try It in a Small Town." He was performing when the man started shooting, and he tried it in a small town by dropping his guitar on stage and running off the stage. That tells you what kind of person he is, regardless of what he says in those song lyrics. But they try to say that was when 50-something people were killed, was the highest massacre in U.S. history. No, that was the indigenous people in 1890 where that happened. And so in 1973, the American Indian movement wanted to commemorate that by taking over the town of Wounded Knee, and they did so. And they had the organization to take that town over for multiple months. And Miss Anna Mae was key to the organization of that direct action. And her friend who was there at Wounded Knee, Mary Crow Dog, actually delivered her baby there, which was an inspiration to the people involved in that struggle. And I have a friend who was in the Portland area who went to Standing Rock and delivered a baby there. And I, in talking to her about delivering her baby, had to remember indigenous woman, indigenous activists there in the Pacific Northwest. I was reminded of Mary Crow Dog and Miss Anna Mae Aquash in Wounded Knee in 1973. So this was the work. And because of this type of work and because of the repression that began to be mounted against the American Indian movement, because of the popularity that had grown within it on the reservations, particularly Pine Ridge Reservation, this intensified the work of Miss Anna Mae in the Pine Ridge, South Dakota reservation area. And it also solidified the acknowledgement of the U.S. government of targeting her as a leader within the American Indian movement. She was probably one of, if not the most highest ranking woman in the American Indian movement during that time. And she was without question identified. FBI files confirm that. I've seen the files. I've seen them. Even though they redact them, they still provide you the information of what they were doing. And they were looking at Miss Anna Mae, and they were attempting to figure out a way to stop her. And if you look at the files, you'll see the Freedom of Information Act makes them available. You can get them for free. If you look at the files, you'll see, I've read them, and they talk about the FBI being impressed with her courage and her willingness to get into a group of men and challenge leadership where it was necessary and challenge things and be able to stand on her own 2 feet as the only woman in that environment, and how she had won the respect of all of the AIM leaders. And as a result, she, in the eyes of the FBI, was extremely dangerous in their efforts to want to sabotage what the American Indian movement was doing at that time. And so we want to talk about this because of what happened with counterintelligence. And this counterintelligence program of the Federal Bureau of Investigation is very, very, very important. And even today in 2023 and beyond, a lot of people still don't understand it. And most of the counterintelligence program of the FBI, it started initially in the 1950s And the targets at that time, because of the Cold War, were the socialist parties in this country, the Communist Party USA, the Socialist Workers' Party. Those types of groups were the prominent targets of counterintelligence. But at that time, most of what they were doing was spying on people, preparing reports of what the people were doing, and trying to figure out ways to discredit the people if they could. In the 1960s, with the more militant direction of the civil rights movement into the Black Power movement, into the Indigenous rights movement, which at that time was certainly led in large part by the American Indian movement, the FBI intensified its efforts to target African organizations, indigenous organizations, like the American Indian movement, like the Black Panther Party, like the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And so these counterintelligence efforts were greatly intensified. And instead of just spying on people, they began to engage in practices, the FBI, such as badjacketing, where they would break into people where people lived and plant evidence, where they would plant false stories about people with people, where they would do enough consistent work with undercover FBI informants who were there specifically to damage the image of activists who were sincere in their work, that they were able to turn people against these sincere activists and put these people in a position of danger. And it happened a number of times. It happened a number of times in the Black Panther Party. People like Alex Rackley, who were working completely on the Black Panther Party program, were murdered by other people in the Black Panther Party because those people were convinced that Alex Rackley was a police agent. People like Samuel Napier in the Black Panther Party, same thing. This happened countless times within the Black Panther Party. You know the story of Fred Hampton and Mark Clark being murdered in Chicago, and how they were set up by an FBI informant, William O'Neill. How George Sams was the FBI informant who set up Alex Rackley in Connecticut. And unfortunately, Miss Mae Pictoh Aquash was another person who was the victim of this illegal sabotage on the part of the FBI. But before we say anything specific about that, going back, if you look at between 1972 and 1976, and you can do this yourself, you don't have to take my word for it, the most dangerous place in the United Snakes of America during that 4 to 5 year period was the Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota. And the reason why this was the case is because to attempt to sabotage the work that the American Indian movement was doing there, the US government, through the FBI, helped facilitate the creation of this group called the Goon Squad. They were called the Goon Squad. It was supposed to mean Guardians of the Oglala Nation. And if you know anything, like the Europeans say the Sioux people, but the indigenous people call themselves the Oglala people, the Lakota people. That's where the term Dakotas come from, North and South Dakota, because that was land that was stolen from the indigenous people, like all the rest of this land was stolen from them. And they elected at the local Indian Bureau, as they called it at that time, Dick Wilson, who was the president of the Indian Bureau, and he was someone who was firmly in the back pocket. He was a neo-colonial leader. He was firmly in the back pocket of U.S. imperialism and its effort to stifle the work of the American Indian movement. And so through the Goon Squad, they were armed by the FBI. They were given armor-piercing bullets by the FBI. They were encouraged to terrorize the people of Pine Ridge. And between 1972 and 1976, they did that to the point where, as I mentioned, that was the murder capital in the entire country of the U.S. during those years. And that was because of the terrorism that was meted out by the Goon Squad against the American Indian movement and everybody at Pine Ridge, which was pretty much everyone that they perceived as supporting the American Indian movement. And Miss Anna Mae, Leonard Peltier, all of the people there were there and engaged in the work for the American Indian movement, and they were all targeted. And we know the story of Leonard Peltier, almost 45 years in prison for 2 FBI agents that were killed at the Pine Ridge Reservation, at the Jumping Bull compound in 1975. And he's been in prison for all these years because of that. They said that he did it, and we know he didn't do it. The people who actually executed those FBI agents, they should have never been there in the first place. They say that indigenous reservations are sovereign land. We know that that's not true, but that's what they say. That's what they claim to try to justify how the relationship exists. They should have never been there in the first place. The indigenous people had every right to defend themselves against those terrorists. So they ended up dead, and they accused Leonard Peltier. So that was the action they engaged against him. And he's still in prison today as a result of that illegal sabotage. Still in prison, just like Mumia Abu-Jamal is still in prison, former Black Panther Party member, just like Jamil Abdullah Al-Amin is still in prison, former SNCC member and member of the African Liberation Movement. So this is what they do, is set us up for murder and target us. And as I mentioned, sadly, Miss Mae Pictoh Aquash, despite all the hard work that she did, despite all the dedication of her work, working with the youth, working with the women, helping coordinate AIM's security at Pine Ridge, which was serious. I've just told you how serious it was there. Despite all the selfless work that this young woman did, who was barely 30 years old, the FBI, through its badjacketing campaign, was able to convince even a number of AIM members that Mae Pictoh Aquash, probably one of the most dedicated AIM members that ever lived, was a police informant. And from there, what happened is that what happened from there is that Anna Mae was targeted by these misinformed people. And we know that in December of 1975, she was placed in a car with some people who were affiliated with the American Indian Movement at the Pine Ridge Reservation. And that was the last time she was seen. And her badly decomposed physical remains were found in a very remote area of the Pine Ridge Reservation in the snow in February of 1976. And what we want to say about this is a lot of people, I've heard a lot of indigenous people today run around talking about, well, the American Indian Movement killed Mae Aquash. And this is the same way a lot of African people run around today talking about, the Black Panther Party killed Fred Hampton and Mark Clark. The Black Panther Party, did this, they did that. No, I mean, this is two things that have to be said about this, that we have to understand. Number one, as great and as much as we honor these organizations, and nobody has more respect for the Black Panther Party and the American Indian Movement than I do. I mean, I was raised by those militants. I was raised by members of the Black Panther Party. They are the reason that I'm here. They trained me. They showed me. They spent time with me. They are the reason that I'm the person that I am. I have had the opportunity, the humble opportunity in solidarity work to bodyguard for Bill Means, who's the executive director of the American Indian Movement today and has been in the movement since all of these things I've talked about with you since the 70s. I've had the opportunity to work with Bill Wapapa, who was one of the architects of the taking over of Alcatraz in 1969 before he made his physical transition several years ago. So nobody respects these people more than I do. But what I understand is that both the Black Panther Party and the American Indian Movement lacked consistent political education. Neither one of those organizations had consistent programs that were designed to do that. And this is the reason why it was so easy for the Federal Bureau of Investigation to take someone like a Douglas Durham and send him to AIM and get him in the position where he could become someone who was trusted by AIM members. And when people like him could say, well, this Mae Aquash, who had done more work in her pinky than he had done for AIM and his whole body and any two bodies, these folks began to believe this because we did not have the skills to understand COINTELPRO at that time. We had never experienced that. But it's not correct to say that the American Indian Movement killed Mae Aquash. It's not correct to say that Wa Bianini, who was formerly Vernon Belcourt, who I mentioned the Belcourts were some of the founders of the American Indian movement. And the All African People's Revolutionary Party had an extremely close relationship with Wabi when he was alive until his physical transition in 2007. And I've seen all kinds of COINTELPRO stuff said about him. The Libyan Jamahiriya gave $1 million to the American Indian movement in the 90s. And that money was never actually received by AIM. And there was a split in AIM at that time. A lot of the people in AIM didn't want AIM to affiliate with Libya. They thought it was too radical. And so they said that Wabi or formerly Vernon Belcourt, stole the money, the $1 million. And we know in the APRP, this is not true. And Bob Brown who is now a member of the All African People's Revolutionary Party, GC, he wrote a letter that's still today on the American Indian Movement website. He wrote in the 90s because Kwame Ture was on the Mataba governing board that awarded the $1 million. So we know the Libyan government, for whatever reason, never gave the money. Wabi didn't steal it. And we know that, just like, he wasn't the one that ordered Mae Pictoh Aquash's assassination, like a lot of people say today. We say that we should recognize that our organizations did not have the political maturity that they needed. And because of that, the U.S. government manipulated us and turned us against one another. And that's it, you all. That's what happened. And so the lesson from that is we can learn from that in 2023. We have organizations today. We have the All African People's Revolutionary Party. We have the Black Alliance for Peace. We have all of our political Pan-Africanist parties on the ground at home in Africa, the African Party for Independence of Guinea-Bissau, the PAIGC, the Democratic Party of Guinea. We have the Pan-Africanist Congress of Azania, the Azanian People's Organization, so on and so forth. We have the Ilahi Spirit Runners and other newer indigenous organizations today in 2023, youth-led organizations like the APRP and the Ilahi Spirit Runners. And so we have to take it upon ourselves as our responsibility to learn from the mistakes of our elders. I am sure that Miss Mae Pictoh Aquash is looking down on us and wants us to learn from mistakes. I'm sure she doesn't want us to be focused on the people who are misguided into causing her harm. I'm sure of that. I'm sure that Fred Hampton doesn't want that. Mark Clark doesn't want that. I'm sure that Alex Rackley doesn't want that. I'm sure that what they want us to do, because all of them were dedicated revolutionaries, those people I just named, and what they wanted us to do today is learn from those errors so we don't fall so easily into the hands of our enemies like our elders did. And if we can just learn that lesson and stop criticizing each other openly on social media and stop doing things that the police are using to strategize against us in ways we're not even fully aware of right now, but will be evident in just a few years. Just like AIM wasn't aware of what was coming down towards them, and the Black Panther Party wasn't aware of what was coming down towards them. You're out of your goddamn mind if you're not aware of what's going to be coming down on us. So now is the time for us to correct our behavior, support our organization, support solidarity, support our work, and refuse to be so easily manipulated to serve our enemies' interests against us. If we truly love and honor Mae Pictoh Aquash, that's what we'll do, you all. That's the only thing we can do. So we want to thank you for joining us, of course, and we ask you to join us next week, Sunday, December 24th. I will be broadcasting from the motherland, Africa, and we will be talking about Christians and Christ, the contradiction of the so-called Miss Christ holiday. We'll be talking about that. So those of you that aren't faint at heart and can't handle truth and makes you want to throw up, you are the ones that want to be here next week to join us. The QR code in the upper left-hand corner gives you all of our programs, all of the APRP programs like Our Ancestors' Voices, like this one. You can check it out. We encourage you to do that strongly. Go to the Forward Ever shop. You know you're going to spend some money on this cracker holiday. So if you got to do that, at least give somebody some conscious clothes to wear, talking about the upliftment of Africa and the liberation of the African masses. we're not on here talking about support Black business. We're on here talking about support African revolutionary organizations. You can do that by going to the Forward Ever shop. Support hoodcommunist.org, www.hoodcommunist.org, Revolutionary African Literature. It's new articles every Thursday. Please give your support. And betterroad.me, you can get all of these videos. They'll be there. Join the All African People's Revolutionary Party at www.aprp-intl.org, or join some organization working for humanity. And the bottom right is our project in Burkina Faso for the APRP. Click on that QR code and find out how you can support that work. All right, you all, we thank you for being here. We ask you to continue to support and buy my book. It's only $8 US, A Guide for Organizing Defense Against White Supremacist, Patriarchal, and Fascist Violence. So you already got the book. Buy some and give them away for Miss Christ, because the money that comes out of that book we use for our anti-fascist work. And we are doing a ton of anti-fascist work. Just this past Tuesday, helped coordinate security for a Palestinian march in Sacramento, where I live, and resources are desperately needed. And I use the money I get from selling this book to get what we need. So we ask you to support that. Tell a friend if they're saying, hey, I want a book that talks about the African liberation struggle or how we can organize in communities, even if you're not African. That's what the book is designed to do. So check it out, and please support it so we can have the resources we need to fight back against these white supremacists and these fascists, because that's what we're going to do. We're going to fight back against them. We ain't begging nobody for nothing, and we certainly ain't calling 911. The fascists are going to need to call 911. We're going to be organized to defend our communities. That's what we're going to do. So we thank you again for being here. We thank you for coming this week. We hope that you are safe, and more so, we hope that you're encouraged. We hope that you feel encouraged and that you are optimistic. We are winning, you all. There's no reason not to be optimistic. So there is nothing wrong with you. You are not the problem. I don't care what they told you at your job. I don't care what they told you at your school. I don't care what your friends told you. I don't care what your family told you. There is nothing wrong with you. The only problem is this backward anti-human system. The minute we get organized and change that, the problems we have right now will be finished overnight. Forward ever, backwards never. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday evening.